In this video, we're going to talk about why your no-code apps planning, development, and launch are feeling way too hard, or why they will feel hard once you get to later stages. And we're going to talk about the one thing, the one change you need to make these feel so much easier and to ultimately move through each of these, the planning, the building, and the launch stages with your no-code app so much smoother and more successful. Now, make sure you stick around until the end because, again, you need to see how this one specific change applies to each of these stages so you can see long-term success with your no-code app in business. Now, first, if you're new around here, my name is Kristen, and I'm the co-founder of Coaching No-Code Apps, where we help business owners and industry experts build custom apps to either start their app-based businesses or grow their existing businesses, all without coding and with no technical background required. You can find us at coachingnocodeapps.com/workshop to join in on a free training to get started. Now, in working with tons and tons of entrepreneurs who typically don't have technical backgrounds and are wanting to either launch an app-based business or launch an app within their existing businesses to help scale further, I see a few bottleneck areas. Okay, and again, this goes back to what I mentioned, the planning stage with your app, the development stage, and the launch stage. And the one key thing that makes such a big difference in the success of each of these stages, plus just overall, right, with their app on a bigger picture level, is how they look at their features versus the outcomes or the goals that the features of their apps enable. Okay, now that might sound a little bit strange or maybe even a little bit straightforward, but I want to dive into this because in having just lots of conversations and seeing entrepreneurs make these mistakes time and time again, I've found that this is really overlooked. And see, what we do here at Coaching No Code Apps is we help entrepreneurs without technical backgrounds go from their idea stages with their apps to being able to have that first scalable version that they can start using and testing, right? Bringing their test users onto. So they go through each of these stages. And we start out by having strategy calls with these entrepreneurs who are interested in going through this process with us. And so we hear about their planning stage over and over and over again. We see this problem over and over and over again. And we see how it bleeds into their building stage. And if they can't make this switch in talking about or thinking about features versus the outcomes of those features, their development stage really struggles. Things like time frame go way over, right? Their whole development process just is filled with lots of unknowns and uncertainties, which you don't want. And then when they go to actually launch their apps and start bringing their first users on board, they really struggle to gain any traction. And so, maybe they put way too much into their planning stage because they haven't made this change yet. And maybe their development stage is just filled with those uncertainties that we talked about and ends up getting delayed as well, which we don't want. And then they get into their launch phase. And because they can't make this change, they kind of they lose any momentum that they felt like they were coming into the launch stage with. And there's just not a lot of speed in growth or growth at all, right? And obviously that's not what you want to see. That's not what you want to experience. And so what we're going to do today is go through exactly how you can make this change so that you can affect these different stages of your app's life cycle, really, and how you can see better success in the immediate and in the long term. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. And we are going to jump over to the whiteboard here so that we can go through this. You see on my screen here, I have the plan, build, and launch phases of your app. Okay, so when looking at making this change between thinking about features only, talking about features only, and instead thinking and talking and planning and building with outcomes in mind, there are a few things that you're going to see change with your app. Now, before we dive into this, I do want to preface this by saying that in reality, now this is going to be a little bit of tough love, and we had this conversation over in our free Facebook group the other day. Nobody cares about your app's features as much as you do. Nobody cares about your features as much as you do. Okay, and that's why it's so important to understand how to make this change and why you need to make this change. Now, I don't mean that to say that your app's features aren't important. Your app's features are important, but they're only important because they enable users to achieve certain outcomes. Okay, and you as the developer, maybe you've already started building your app, maybe you haven't quite yet. You're the person who has spent potentially years thinking about this app idea. You're the person who has spent months to years planning to build this app. You're the person, if you've already started building it, your hands are in it, right? If you're using no-code tools and you're building your app, your hands are in it maybe every single day. And whether you enjoy development 100% of the time or not, this is going to be a passion project for you. When you make a breakthrough on the tiniest little feature in your app as a developer, you're going to get excited, right? And you're going to feel fondly about that feature. And it's something that you're going to want to talk about. But you have to realize that nobody really cares about those things from a user's perspective. Okay, they don't care about this little feature that you spent a week trying to figure out how to make work, just as you'd envisioned. They don't care about that. They really only care that that feature lets them do a certain thing. They care about the thing, not the feature. Okay, so I'm prefacing this, or I'm prefacing this what we're about to go into with that sort of reality check, because it's important to detach yourself a little bit from the features. Detach yourself from the technical things in your app, the things that your hands are on every single day, and now put yourself in a user's shoes and think, okay, or put yourself not even in a user's shoes, but just in someone else's shoes who's learning about your app. Okay, and think about, what do they care about? Okay, so little context caveat over here. Now we're going to dive into this image that you see on the whiteboard. We're going to go through each of these stages. Okay, so when you're in your initial planning stage, now the planning stage that I'm talking about is the stage at which you've already decided to build your app. Okay, so you have your initial validation. Now you're planning to build it and you're figuring out, okay, first, what is my scope? Okay, so what does the first version look like? Which phases am I going to develop and launch at certain times? Okay, so you're looking at just really your version 1 scope, and you are looking at who's going to help you, or how are you going to get help doing this? Now, this is something that is really overlooked, but the reason why I bring these two things up is because if you are thinking only about features, okay, the scope that you decide is your first version app. It likely is not going to serve any intent. Okay, you want the version 1 of your app to have a very specific goal, and you want it to have a lot of intent. Okay, this is not just, all right, which features do I like the most, or how many features can I put into this first version, or just, it's not even just, I've thought of all of these features and these are all going to go into my app. No, it has to be more strategic than that. You have to be looking for specific feedback that you're going to be getting, specific users that you're going to be onboarding, specific goals, specific outcomes. Okay, so if you're only thinking about features, you're just thinking about all the cool things that you want your app to do. Have you said that before? Oh, this would be really cool. This would be really cool. When you're thinking about your features, that's a bad sign. Okay, now I understand because I've said it before myself, but that's a bad sign. Instead, you need to be thinking about, okay, what outcome do I want to achieve? What should my users be able to achieve after this first version? What's the immediate goal they need to achieve? What's the major core solution? Okay. Now, when we have strategy calls with entrepreneurs who are joining us to go from their idea stage to having their app. This is one of the things that they look at and we look at with them. It's okay, what's the reason for the scope that you're going to start out with? And when you can explain this scope in terms of outcomes, it's a lot easier to then tease out the features. Okay. Again, the features don't matter. It's the outcomes. So if you start with the features, you have to sort of force them to achieve an outcome. If you start with the outcome, on the other hand, then you can say, okay, this is the goal. Now, what do I need in order to get me there? Or what do I need in order for my users to get there? Okay, it's much, much easier to plan that way. It's common sense goal setting, okay? But we're looking at scope. It's the exact same thing. Now, with that in mind, I mentioned help. Now, when you're in the planning stages, you've already decided to build your app, but you're now, you have the initial validation, you're going to build your app, you haven't started yet, you're likely going to be looking for help, whether that is with a consultant, with a company like ours who's going to help you go through like a mentorship program, potentially outsourcing, maybe finding partners, maybe finding people, like technical co-founders, or rather co-founders in this sense. If you're using no-code tools, you don't have to have a technical co-founder, but you're looking for maybe even initial investors if you want to go that route. If you don't know how to explain the outcomes of your app, if you don't know how to explain what your app helps users achieve, you're going to have a very hard time getting anyone to come on board, even someone who you're paying to help you. Because if they can't understand really what it is you're building or why it is you're building it, it's going to be hard for them to fully come on board and help you. And again, I see this happening in our strategy calls. When people can't explain the why behind their app and they can only explain the what, a couple things happen. One, it takes them a really long time to explain their apps. Now, let me ask you, if you have ever explained your app to someone or your app idea, and I hope you have, but if you have, how long did you spend doing that? Okay. And how long could you have spent? Now, most people could easily spend, a couple of hours just explaining their app to someone if they were able to, if that person let them. But when that starts to happen, when you're having this long conversation, and again, you're probably really excited about it, but you kind of start to see the person's eyes glaze over, things just become irrelevant. And again, it's because when you just talk about a bunch of features, there's no connection, there's no cohesion, there's no intent. Okay, so you have to be able to concisely convey who your app is for, what it helps them do, outcomes. The features are secondary to the outcomes. Okay, so we're going to move forward from here, but with scoping, right, with having an intent for your first version, with getting help with your app, you have to be able to explain outcomes. So if you can only explain your app's features, this is something you need to work on. Okay. Now we're going to move into the build phase here. So again, explaining features versus outcomes here, even for yourself, even just thinking about it is so important. So what I'm going to put here is features, and this might sound a little bit redundant, but once you have your initial scope and you say, okay, this is the first goal that I want my users to be able to achieve, right? We're looking at the scope in that sense. Well, then we need to say, okay, these are all the features that need to go within that scope, again, in order for that end goal to be achieved. Now, when we're looking at the specific features, you also need to be able to explain the outcomes. Okay, so if you have one specific feature that is a part of that initial scope, why is it there? And what does it help a user achieve? Okay, on a really granular level, right? So a user can book a time slot on this calendar so that they can insert achievement here, insert outcome here. Again, it can sound really simple and maybe a bit straightforward. But most people just think, okay, I need a calendar feature, all right? A lot of things can go into a calendar feature. A calendar can be an app in and of itself. So if you say, I need a calendar feature, and that's all you have to go on, chances are you're going to spend way too long on that calendar feature. You're going to put way too many sub features within it. That calendar feature might be within your initial scope, but you're going to be putting way too many complexities within it that do actually go out of scope. Okay, but if you have a specific goal, outcome, something really, really specific tied to the calendar feature, then that can rein you in and keep you from building this really complex, really complicated feature that has a lot of stuff that nobody needs, that just doesn't serve any intent. Okay, so make sure that with each of your granular features within that first version scope or within any version that you're building, you have to be able to tie a specific outcome with it so that you can stay within that scope. And that kind of takes us to time and budget. And it goes back into what I was just saying. If you cannot explain the outcomes, explain the goals, then every single feature you build, it's going to take you longer than you want. And that's just going to push you outside of budget, right? The budget is going to be connected to the time in some way. Even if you are building this in a complete, you're building your no-code app in a complete DIY fashion, right? It's still going to push you outside of budget because eventually you're just going to be spending so much time on this that your time could have been better spent doing something else, okay? So in your development phase, you just have to be able to stick to the scope that, again, achieves a certain outcome, and each of those granular features need to also achieve a certain outcome so that you don't just end up completely kind of destroying the time and the budget you set, which you really don't want to happen. Okay, so we're going to move into the launch phase now. And this is where the impact gets even bigger, really. Because when you're looking at the launch phase, and I'm talking about an initial beta launch, right? Your very first version launch, not like some big grand opening, but the very first launch, and then any launch moving forward, or any expansion, any feature launch, anything moving forward, okay? You have to be able to explain the outcomes so that you can actually make conversions. Because again, going back to the gut check on who cares about your features the most, you care about your features the most. Users don't. Users care that right now they have a problem, and that problem has consequences. It's affecting their lives in some way. It's affecting their businesses in some way. They also care that they want to move away from the problem and they want to achieve an outcome. Okay, they are in a current reality or a before. They want to get to the after. All right. Your app's features don't really matter all that much to a user if your app can take the person from that problem, that current reality, move them to the outcome they want to achieve. All right. So you put whatever features you want in there. If it achieves that goal for a user, they're not going to care, really. Okay, maybe if they've been using an app or software that is similar to the one that you have, and they're switching over and they're used to certain features and they already understand how they use certain features, then okay, the features become a little bit more important, but the outcome is still the most important thing, especially when we're talking about conversions. Sales, okay, sales. Talk about the benefits, you talk about the outcomes versus just talking about the specs and the features, okay? And you need to get the right feedback. And this is something that a lot of people, they just don't think about. When you're launching and you don't actually have specific outcomes tied to everything you're doing, you're going to get really muddy, murky feedback. You're going to get feedback on how to change potentially certain features and while that sounds like it should be a good thing and you do want that type of feedback, you have to have a why attached to that. Why should a feature be changed in a certain way? Because something I see happening way too often is when people start getting feedback on their apps and their features, they think every piece of feedback is the priority. And so they go and they just put all of it into their apps. Okay, that's not really how you should handle it. You need to intake feedback, but you need to implement the right feedback and you need to implement it at the right time. Okay, all the feedback is helpful and it's good data, but it's not all the priority. But you can't really discern that unless you understand the outcomes. Okay, so if a feature needs to be changed, why? How is it going to enable a user to achieve an outcome in a better way, in a different way, right? Why does that need to happen? There has to be a why, okay? So, looking at, just going back here and looking at the planning phase, if you can only explain your features and you can't explain any outcome or any why behind your app, you're going to have a hard time actually taking a concrete step into the development phase with the scope that you need, a strategic scope, and with the help that you need. And the help that will be the right help. In other words, if you bring on help, they need to be able to help you in the right way, okay? So you have to be able to explain this or take this sort of different mindset instead of features, outcomes, okay? And when you look at the build phase, in our mentorship program, we have calls sometimes where entrepreneurs can sort of practice pitch their apps and get feedback. And one of the things when they kind of forget or fail to take on this mindset is they go through all the features, all the little features in their apps, and the feedback isn't as helpful as it could be or should be. When they can talk about the benefits and the outcomes, then instantly it connects in people's minds. They say, oh, okay, so your app is helping users achieve X. Oh, that's why this feature is in there. Because again, a feature is a feature is a feature. You're going to see the same features across tons and tons of apps. Why the features are in an app is what actually matters, okay? And then when we get to the launch phase, right, it's the same thing. If you can't explain to your users, your prospective users rather, how your app is going to help them achieve a certain goal, you are really going to struggle to make conversions. Your sales are going to struggle. If you're doing demos, they're going to struggle. It's going to be hard for you to build up traction. The feedback you get from your initial users, it's going to be hard to implement it in the right ways, in the right places, at the right times, in ways that really benefit the users, right? It's going to be giving you a lot of work to do, but not actually moving you forward in any significant way. Okay, so it all comes down to, oops, there's a wrong pin there. It all comes down to outcomes, right, versus just the features. The outcomes are the things that are top priority and will help you at every single stage with your app. In these initial stages from plan to very first launch and onward, just indefinitely. So I encourage you to make this mindset switch to, change the way you're talking about your app so that you can ultimately achieve that immediate success you're after and the long-term success. And just make this a whole lot easier on yourself. All right, so I hope that's helpful for you. If you want to move forward with your app in the right way and really take this to heart, I mentioned at the beginning, we have a free training at coachingnocodeapps.com/workshop. And it's going to take you some of this. through some of this. It's going to take you through, choosing that right scope, making sure that you have solid reasons and intentions behind what you're doing so that you can launch the right versions, launch in the right ways, and actually build earlier traction, which is what we want for you. So you can head to coachingnocodeapps.com/workshop to join in on that. Again, I hope this was helpful for you. Thanks so much for watching, and we'll see you in the next one.